Hi guys, good to be here. Lee Taylor, Chief Financial Officer of OnlyFans. Quick show of hands, who's heard of OnlyFans? Keep your hands up if you've got an account. Everyone always puts their hands down. 300 million users, I've never met one of them. When I next do a conference and someone leaves their hands up, I've got nothing to say on that. So I'm the Chief Financial Officer. I've been in the business 5 years since we were in the startup phase. Everything to do with payments that flows through our company comes through me. And we've been building the rails out over a period of time. ID is a key element of our business. I'm sure we'll go into it in more depth, but yeah, good to be here.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming out. Nate Soffio with Portabl. We're using decentralized ID tech to solve for reusable identity in open banking and payments. I'm something of an identity journeyman. I've been in the space since 2011 on all sides of the KYC, KYB, AML problems, and all the other like acronyms and agencies that we all know and love, or maybe don't love. Identity is at a real tipping point right now. Excited to get into it. But over to Frances.
So Frances Zelazny, I'm co-founder and CEO of Anonybit. We are a decentralized infrastructure that protects personal data and digital assets. I'm sure we'll get into how Anonybit and Portabl is a little bit different. I've been in this space for, this month will be 25 years. So I've seen it all, the good, bad, and the ugly in biometrics. And I started when nobody even knew what facial recognition was about. So happy to be here and happy to see how far along we've come in the industry and all the use cases that we're supporting today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Sue. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Skipify. Lee asked how many people have heard of OnlyFans. How many people have heard of Skipify? Yeah, awesome. That'd be a big win and objective if folks have heard of Skipify after this conference. So nice to meet you all. Skipify is a digital wallet, and our differentiator is that we partner with financial institutions such as American Express, and this morning if you were in the keynote with Visa, to bring checkout to the next level, to drive conversion for merchants and a better experience for users. I'm really glad to be a part of this panel today.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the introductions. Let's get right into this. Deepfakes, as we talk about, right? It's such a trending topic. We are learning so much about how this whole thing is collaborative with AI, as well as might bring some sort of disruption as well. What do you think are the most important key challenges that you see in this industry in terms of the digital identity that's bringing to the world? Nate?
Sure, I can open up. One of the things that we think about a lot at Portabl is fragmentation is actually the thing that we're fighting against. So everyone in this room has PII scattered around tons and tons of places. Some of it's stale, some of it's fresh. It'll agree, disagree. This is a problem that's 20 or 30 years in the making, and certainly since the Patriot Act, that the data, when spread around, makes it very easy to be vulnerable to things like impersonation, other types of identity hijacking, things like that. So fragmentation is really like the root evil that we really care about. And where something that's very interesting, if you've not read it, is FinCEN released a report based on the 2021 SAR filings. And the crazy information, or the crazy headline that came out of that, is some 42% of all the SARs stem from identity-related issues. Of that, 69% is impersonation because of either weak credentials, so typical stuff like bad passwords, OTP phishing, one. And then two, impersonation. And that's added up to about $212 billion in economic losses for 2021, just because, well, frankly, identity infrastructure kind of sucks. So this is really what we're setting out to fix. How can we say this data and this particular data can be subject-bound and device-bound, secured with biometrics, or beyond that, cryptographic keys, to say that, hey, this data belongs with this person and only this person. If you see it pop up somewhere else, probably stolen, probably fake, probably this, that, or the other. So I guess the meta message that I'll end off with is there has to be different ways to establish trust if we're starting to enter into this era where we can't believe anything anymore, which is not to freak anyone out with what I just said, but we have to look at other alternative ways to establish personhood and trust beyond like a selfie that might get injected or a document that might be fake or things like that. So what other parts of our digital lives can attest to true things about us? And more importantly, how do we allow people to really easily aggregate that stuff and reuse it? Sort of in the way we're used to like log in with Google and log in with Facebook and other federated solutions today. How do we solve for that for much more complicated and high assurance use cases where, financial access and financial management is on the line, fraud is on the line from the B2B perspective? And has a lot to do with, protocols in use, but also thinking about storage. And so I think when we start thinking about storage, I definitely want Frances to chime in here, since that's really her jam.
Yes, the way I look at the problems today is really framed around preventing data breaches and account takeover fraud, which stems from three things, really. The personal data stored inside centralized honeypots that are impossible to protect, that we allow the use of the stolen data for authentication at some point in the user journey. So you can have the best KYC, the best AML, the best deepfake detection of the account opening process. You can have the best passwordless login experience. But if you allow someone to call the help desk and say what their dog ate for breakfast or what their mother's favorite color was in order to reset the account, then you may as well just leave the front door open as well. And the third challenge that we see today in digital identity is that a lot of these processes are siloed within the organizations themselves. So whoever is doing account opening or account origination is not necessarily responsible for the customer lifecycle authentication or the help desk. And I think these are taken all together, these are the major challenges from a very high level. And then you compound that with the deepfake challenges and Gen AI and the ability to create synthetic identities and combine all different kinds of information. It really can be overwhelming. The good news is, don't want to scare everyone away, but the good news is that if you layer solutions and you layer different technologies, there are ways to address it. But the key is to really understand where the problem is emanating from so that you can layer the right approaches together.
Rightly said. I think that it's very important to address these challenges and come across solutions that can help the society as a whole. Talking about companies like Skipify, you guys leverage digital platforms. You make sure that there has to be a seamless transaction for your consumers. What do you think is the evolution of digital identity in e-commerce for upcoming decade, maybe?
Yeah. I think one thing that we are seeing as a trend is biometric authentication, right? And actually, one of my favorite billboards in San Francisco, I don't know if folks are from the Bay Area at all, it's a password reminder billboard, and it's like, what is your ex's dog's name, right? As like a way to get through your password, which I think is the best billboard of all time. But it's a big, when I think about these types of trends, I always think about it from the merchant perspective and then like the end user from our own perspective, right? And as it comes to like e-commerce, where biometric is really beneficial for the merchants is that the shopper doesn't have to have this like really clunky experience of trying to log in, right? Biometric is quick. It's also secure, right? And it reduces fraud. Fraud is going to go and shift elsewhere. But it's a much better experience for the merchants. And that's when you're going to start to see more shoppers move through the funnel in a smoother way, right? So they're very, very excited about that. From an end shopper perspective, that's just an easier experience, right? So if you can go through that process faster, you can spend your time doing what you actually want to do, right? Shopping on the site versus trying to figure out how to get there, how to check out, things like that. So we're very excited about it.
That's great. Biometric, again, they are playing a vital role in the industry. And companies like Skipify, Portabl, all of these, I think there's a way of having or handling the biometric identification in the future, which of course makes sense. How do you anticipate the role of AI and ML into this? That's another trending topic that we have. How do you anticipate digital identity and AI ML being together and talking to each other, Frances?
So I'm going to first pick up on the point around the storage. So with the adoption of biometrics comes great responsibility, of course, in how do you manage and store the information, which is spurning new models and techniques ranging from the kinds of things that Nate is working on in terms of verifiable credentials, and also the kinds of things that Anonybit is working on around decentralized storage and processing of this personal information. There is a difference, though, like when you do verifiable credentials, where you have a credential that is tokenized versus storing and managing biometrics in a distributed way. But I think it really starts there, because if you can figure out how to safely use biometrics across the user journey, then you can unleash all of the kinds of experiences that the two of you are talking about, the promise. So I think it really starts with the core there. And then, like I said before, you layer on some of the aspects around Gen AI and deepfake. So there's actually 3 capabilities that need to be considered there. One is presentation attack. How do you prevent someone from taking my picture off of Facebook or Insta and then presenting that at the point of purchase? How do you prevent someone from taking the recording of this session and creating a deepfake of me? And then number 3, how do you prevent, which in my opinion is probably the most dangerous, an injection attack? So these are the 3 things that have to be layered in. And like I said, the good news is there are companies, and this is what they do. So as we design systems, we need to make sure that you fundamentally address the storage and the processing of the biometric, and then also the potential deepfake / presentation attack that could circumvent any secure transaction.
Anything from both of you, Lee and Nate? Any inputs on this?
I think for us as like the merchant in this space, one of the key, as I said earlier, one of the key focuses and skill sets of our business is that kind of KYC and identity verification piece. So we're looking at people like Portabl, Anonybit, Skipify, and going, okay, we know what we want in terms of we want a safe environment for both sets of users. So we have fans who are going to be making the payments on the site, and creators who are going to essentially be receiving the money from their content. So we're constantly looking at third-party providers and saying, look, how are you going to keep this safe? How are we going to have that right level of friction, or not friction on the payment side, but maybe friction on that kind of AML side, paying the creators, to ensure that we're getting what we want? I think our concern is the more split or separate this is, it's a concern for us that we need leaders in the space to help solve. And that's why it's great to come to things like this and listen to the challenges that you guys have, because it gives a great insight for us.
I think you just spoke about friction, right? I think for companies like you, it's very important to have that user experience seamless. And we have been talking about user experience from the very start of this conversation. But what are those necessary frictions that you think are important to indulge into this?
I think the biggest friction we've intentionally brought into the platform is identity itself. So if you look at other social media platforms out there, anywhere that people can connect and interact, I won't list them, but everyone can think of them. There is no need to give up your identity in that. You can spin up a user tag on a social media platform and post to your heart's consent, and there's no repercussions in the digital space as there would be in the physical space. If we're to sit here and have a conversation, and if I had some controversial views on things, that Nate disagreed with, and you're never gonna turn up in the way that you are, or some people do online, in person, because there's ramifications, there's consequences to that. So we've put that friction in of going, we need to know exactly who everyone on the site is, be it a fan making a payment, and more so a creator receiving the money. So our onboarding on the creator, there's 10 different steps, all of the standard information you'd have if you're signing up to a bank. But even past that, we need your social media handles. We need to know how you're turning up in the digital space. Are you, professing hate speech on another platform? If so, okay, it's up to us whether we want to give you an account or not. Me personally, I was rejected for an OnlyFans account because I didn't have a social media handle. And apparently LinkedIn is not cool enough to be a social media handle. So I had to ask our CTO very nicely to grant me an account outside of that. It's the only exception we've made. But that's an example of adding friction, because what that does is then keeps the community safe. And anecdotally, it's very hard to measure, in a more kind of detailed way, but the feedback we've had is that it's a much better user experience online because of that friction we've put in. As I said earlier, people are, if they've given up their identity at the door, they're going to act in a very different way than if they were anonymous user completely. So I think there's a big value in friction in that sense, in terms of safety, but then in terms of the that kind of payment side and that user journey on the payment side, if you don't want any fraud, then don't have any transactions. I think on the keynote earlier, your CEO mentioned that and spoke very well to that. So it's finding that, and actually from Visa made a very good point for issuing banks. Yeah, it's that you need a threshold of comfort and you need good controls around it, but as seamless as you can make that user payment experience, the better.
Yeah. I mean, we think about that all the time, right? It's like, what's the right level of friction that ensures the right people are getting across to the other side as quickly as they can, right? So we're constantly kind of balancing, introducing points of friction, but at the same time, trying to get on so much of a secure environment as possible and getting the right people across the finish line as quickly as possible. So it's, we think about all the same things.
I think it's not a one size fits all. Like if you look at, you guys are more focused on e-commerce. And if you look at banking or you look at maybe high-end e-commerce or not, the equation might be a little bit different, because you as a consumer might expect, you don't want it to be too easy, because then you're like, wait a second, what's going on in the back end? Yeah, there might be some expectation.
Yes.
But I'll just go back to layering. I mean, there's you can combine different fraud detection techniques and things to balance out balance out the fraud and the friction depending on what is happening at that time. So I could be very annoyed if I'm in a new location and all of a sudden my transaction gets declined because I feel like the system should recognize me. However, even in an e-commerce situation, if I'm doing a $30,000 wire transfer, I would like the bank to call me, especially because I know what's happening with all the fraud and the account takeovers and things on the other side. So it's not, I don't think it's a one size fits all.
In new account opening, there's some interesting stuff going on, because I think for a long time, we've all been accustomed to these sort of interminable workflows to just get something started. So just quick show of hands for folks out there. For anyone who's opened a new account or financial product or app or something like that, how many of you remember going through the onboarding flow and not knowing, say, when is this flow going to be done, or how many steps do I have left? Okay, that's I'm going to ballpark 2/3. There's some stuff going on right now that we're working on that allow us to compress friction and then redraw it as consent, dynamic consent. So, one of the things that's really interesting about being able to reuse data in these sorts of contexts is that we can compress, flows that might take 5, 10, 12, 15 screens and confusing interactions and get it down to a screen. Just hey, welcome back. You've got this data, but you're missing this data. Do you want to continue? And so for us, that's kind of the hallmark of what we're trying to do by letting people kind of bring vetted data along for the ride. I think 2 points from that. One, like your story, Lee, about adding Twitter handles and things like that. That's interesting anecdotally, because that's a very lightweight way of saying, hey, by the way, can we get other pieces of your digital life to vouch for you in specific contexts? Yep. And so for us, that becomes very, very interesting if we've set up a flow or a state where, hey, grab a document, their open banking identity and ACH information, bind it, and then maybe also, if necessary, get a verifiable credential that was signed by their primary financial institution. Mm-hmm. Can you collapse that into a single interaction? Say, hey, you've got these 3 things. Let's just grab your email or something. So for us, we said friction is still necessary. It can't be too easy, especially if you're opening, a significant account or a large line of credit or something more involved. But just because there's a lot of scrutiny that has to be done in order to obtain certain types of financial access, it doesn't mean you have UX hell, right? It's had people from the 700 some odd people we've surveyed, 98% of them said, I just want to see everything I have to share on one screen, and that's that. That's all that I want. That is sufficient friction for me, because the transparency is more important than the friction. Obviously, when talking about it from the B2B perspective, a little bit different. Friction is necessary for behavioral issues to inject step up, stuff like that, and all that still applies. But I think if we can say, okay, let's get the necessary friction down to something that just is consent oriented, then we've kind of hit a different way of thinking about getting rid of the trade-off between annoying applicants and then letting bad apples through the door.
Got it. We're talking so much about data. We just spoke about the user seamless experience that has to be there. Now we're talking about friction that is necessary and that is not necessary. And especially companies like OnlyFans, if I may say, right? There has to be a good balance of consumer data as well as user data, the privacy that comes in, also with Skipify, right? How you're leveraging the data for the consumer as well as users. What do you think is the situation where a data breach happens? Because you're dealing with a lot of personal data which these consumers have. Who is responsible for that?
I guess it depends where the data is, right? In the e-commerce world, I think, as a platform, we take the responsibility to ensure we're using the right partners and navigating where their data should be held. So as I said earlier, our continually evolving focus is what data are we collecting, who's processing that data, who's storing that data, and how are they securing that data. I don't think we've got to the end stage of all of those answers, but we've set ourselves up internally, data protection officers, staying ahead of very ever-changing regulatory kind of landscape as well. Like you guys must be, if in Europe it's one thing, if in America it's a different thing. So all of that is to say, I think we take the responsibility on ourselves as a platform to embed ourselves with our partners to know exactly what is happening at each stage of the situation and the security at each level. And then in our own database as well, where a lot of the data is held, working with our platform partners, I would say we're a fairly decent target for a lot of attacks, and we've had to build that up over time in terms of security layers, but it's about finding the right partners to work with. And I'm pleased to say there hasn't been a data breach, so that would so far, and it's just by being diligent and not. I think the worst thing a platform can do is go, well, Portabl's got this, they told us it's fine, and take the hands off. So we get more involved than maybe we're expected to, but I think it's a strength.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of rigor. As a startup working with financial institutions, there's many security and compliance hoops that we have to jump through, right? Working with large merchants, there's vendor security checks, right? So there's a lot of rigor. Something that you have to get right.
And it's changing all the time.
Yeah.
So what we found is that this issue is actually goes to the heart of why there continues to be fraud. Because it's a bit of a hot potato, like who's going to store the data, who's going to manage the data, where is the data, across borders and things like this. And specifically, when it comes to biometrics, specifically. So the one thing that could save us is the thing that everybody is afraid of managing. So if you can get past that and say, okay, I figured out how to store the data in a secure way and not feel like I'm going to get breached every 2 seconds, then I can feel more comfortable in using it for not only fraud prevention, but also to unleash good customer experiences and things like this. So actually, this goes to the heart of Anonybit, and why we built the platform the way we did, so that there is like talking about compliance and things like this, so you can kind of get past the reticence of leveraging this data for these kinds of things.
In extension to the partnerships that we are talking about, right? You just mentioned about a few partnerships that you can do in order to secure this data. What do you think is the ecosystem collaboration that this world can see?
So there's plenty of collaborations. I mean, just here, on the stage, right? I think there are many ways that all of us can work together. And for me personally, I think that this is to really solve this, it's really about building an ecosystem that leverages all of these different capabilities and creating a situation where the merchant community, the banking community can trust the identities that are being presented. So that's where Nate is coming from. But also the organizations that are issuing these credentials should also have distributed privacy by design frameworks, because the fraudsters are like water. They're just going to go to the path of least resistance. So if the back end is centralized or the back end can be compromised, then that's what they're going to do. You have to reissue a credential. They're going to try to use stolen data in order to do that. So imagine a situation where you have a reusable identity or a trusted identity framework that you mentioned Visa before, so we'll just pick Visas in the audience. We'll pick Visa. Imagine a world where Visa is tapping into a back end that has a trusted identity framework, and then the merchant community and the banking community can then, leverage that. It is possible to do this. This is not what, like, when I started 25 years ago. It's possible because we have technologies that are privacy enhancing, that can be distributed globally, that don't require centralized one size fits all. These are systems that can handle face, that can handle palm, that can handle online, in store, in the branch, at the help desk, in the chat. So we're here. And there are ways to create these ecosystems that everyone can tap into.
I'll probably chime in there. I will say collaboration is why Skipify is able to do what we do. I think in the prior keynote session, right, our ability now to bring approval rates to card not present transactions to be, on par with card present, we wouldn't be able to offer that if it wasn't for the collaboration and partnership that we're seeing with partners like Visa, American Express, right? So it's certainly possible. It is a hard thing to do, but I think it enables new products and experiences and results. So I think most of all results that, is leading.
We're starting to see the beginning of it. Look at the pilot that JP Morgan is doing, right? Look at Amazon, Palm in store.
Yep.
So we're seeing the beginnings of this. It's not like now take that and extend it to the online world, right? So I think we're really starting to see this happen.
Can I ask on that? So I agree with you in terms of that solution, and Visa is a really good example. How is there blockers to that being global? as I mentioned earlier, in the kind of regulatory space, the different jurisdictions in the world are taking different stands on this. So is that one of the main blockers of it truly being embedded in e-commerce? Because the main difference between card not present and card present is e-commerce, and e-commerce is global. Like, the benefit is that someone in Japan can make a payment to someone in the US, but to really make it a global solution, there can't be a blocker to that digital identity across borders. And I don't know the answer. Like, fascinated to know, like, what.
So the simple answer is that the issuer would bind the biometric to the card number or the token or whatnot. That's a simple answer. And then, not to get too technical here, but the one of the reasons why we built our platform using multi-party computation and not blockchain is that we can control where the original data is being hosted and managed. And so this way you can deal with the regulatory requirement of, not having the person's biometric leaving the borders of the country or whatnot. So there are frameworks. I think if we were just starting from scratch, we would say issue a payment token or a credit card bound to a particular biometric. And now you have the foundation for any strong authentication downstream that you can invoke if the risk is high. So you don't need to have friction every single time, but if you need it for whatever reason, it could be rule-based, something above a certain amount, or it could be risk-based, like all of a sudden somebody has a new device, or, they're in a location that they've never been. Instead of declining the transaction, now you can just step it up to an authentication and then it would go back. And actually, I think a lot of the frameworks in Europe around, open banking and things lend themselves. It's, again, like, I feel like the pieces are there. It could just like one more step, and it's not that we're so far away.
Yeah, I would take that from a go-to-market lens of like, it's just geo by geo. The issues that you have to work through, the dynamics of each geo is just so different that it's an open dialogue with the partners to figure out what's the right approach.
I think this has been a very effective conversation so far. We are learning so much about how organizations are, like, what kind of steps these organizations are taking in order to address deepfakes as a whole. I would like to have something from the audience if anybody has any questions on any of the details that has been discussed so far.
Just a question about government issued identification, like Estonia. Comment about that?
Yeah, I can chime in.
Of course.
Yeah, I can chime in there. Right now we're operating mostly in the US, though we have some stuff potentially going on in Canada and Latin America. Canada has a United Trust framework, and that makes things easy to do. But when we got started some years ago, we looked at, okay, what's going on in Estonia? What's going on in India? What nascently is going on in Europe vis-a-vis PSD2, and now we have IDOS 2.0. And we said, okay, the common denominator in those is that it's public-private partnerships. You have the government or issuing authority serving as what's called a root of trust, and it allows you to put a document or digital artifact from a document into an app or digital wallet, and then you use it. Great. Seems simple on face at the very least. I think that ends up kind of falling over in the US. Like, that, it ain't gonna work. And so, some of the decisions we made by default are that it's appless. We don't have to rely on Google and Apple necessarily to make this work. It can work with state IDs. It will be a little funky because the MDL standard is state by state instead of a federal thing. So it will be inconsistent in terms of MDL support, but there's other ways to accomplish state IDs. And then it should be able to support other types of multi-attestation frameworks, whether it's my identity from my bank, so mimicking like Bank ID in the Nordics, which is another useful model we like, or it's mimicking verified data from some other accounts I decide to cross-link and say, hey, these are all valid and, I can switch these out. So we learned a lot in our early days of looking at Estonia and other national ID programs, and we're just like, okay, there's only a bit of this is actually going to hold in the US. Everything else, it's going to need different standards to work. I think the closest operating model we have today is what's happening in Europe with IDOS 2.0, which is built on verifiable credentials and DIDs. And that's been really exciting to see that like formalized at the public-private partnership level.
We are seeing a big movement adoption of like mobile driver's licenses in the US. And so that's creating like a framework for digital identity. And we're also seeing the interplay between existing systems and usage. Like how many of you have done the Delta digital ID board your like go past TSA without a document?
Wow. Big number.
So if you've actually experienced this is like really, it's incredible because it's actually a public-private partnership between Delta and CBP. It's leveraging the passport database. And so that's just an example of, these emerging frameworks, and then you apply that into, other use cases. And so as more and more DMVs issue mobile driver's licenses, we'll see those kinds of things take hold more and more and more.
Any other questions? All right. I think that was a great conversation. I hope you all got some more insights on what this deepfake is all about and how all the organizations are taking a step towards it to have a better growth in every organization. Thank you so much for all of you to join us and give insights from your end.